The year is 1241, Legnica, Poland. Tens of thousands of Europe's finest, proudest knights, clad in shining steel, are dead. They did not die in a glorious battle, but in a calculated, methodical slaughter. They faced something that their rule books of war, their entire concept of honor, could not comprehend. That something came from the east, a storm of flesh and bone. And this is why, from the very beginning, the so-called greatest warriors of Christendom never stood a chance. Part 1. The Knight's Deadly Illusion. To understand the fall of the knight, we must first expose his greatest illusion. European knightly warfare was not about annihilation. It was a game, a nobleman's sport with rules. The primary goal was often not to kill the enemy, but to capture him for ransom. A captured duke was worth a fortune, an entire estate. Battles followed a familiar script: grand challenges, honorable one-on-one duels, and a shared respect for those of the same noble class. They fought for honor, for God, and for profit. The Mongols, however, were different. They didn't play the game. To them, war was total subjugation. Their goal wasn't ransom. It was absolute, terrifying obedience. They didn't come to duel. They came to erase. When a Polish knight charged, shouting a challenge at a Mongol general, he didn't receive an honorable duel in return. He received a volley of arrows from all sides, striking both man and horse, turning him into a steel porcupine before he even understood what was happening. To the Mongols, the knight's code of honor was a critical weakness, and they exploited it without mercy. Their brutality wasn't random. It was a psychological tool. They launched the corpses of prisoners over castle walls with catapults to spread disease and terror. They used captured civilians as human shields, forcing knights to butcher their own countrymen if they wanted to attack. While the knights saw war as a contest between men, the Mongols saw it as a plague to be spread with maximum efficiency. And in this clash of philosophies, the illusion of honor was shattered. Part 2. The perfect war machine. If philosophy was the brain, then Mongol tactics and technology were the teeth. And those teeth were impossibly sharp. The weapon that defined everything was the Mongol composite bow. This was no ordinary bow. It was an engineering marvel crafted from layers of wood, animal horn, and sinew, all laminated together with a powerful adhesive. A skilled Mongol archer could fire accurately over 350 yards, almost double the range of the later English longbow. Their specialized arrows could pierce the chainmail armor that European knights believed made them invincible. But a weapon is nothing without the tactics to wield it. And their most famous, most devastating tactic was the feigned retreat. Picture it: a small Mongol cavalry unit attacks the knightly line. They fire a few volleys, then suddenly turn and flee, appearing to be in a panic. For a European knight, this was the moment of glory. The enemy was breaking pride, and bloodlust took over. They spurred their heavy horses into a thunderous charge, their neat formations dissolving into a chaotic, frenzied pursuit. They had no idea they were riding straight into a death trap. Once the knights were drawn far enough away from their main force, exhausted and disorganized, a Mongol horn would sound. From the flanks, from the rear, thousands, then tens of thousands of hidden Mongol horsemen would suddenly appear. The pursuit became an encirclement. The hunters became the hunted. The isolated, heavy, and tired knights were now stationary targets for a storm of arrows that rained down from every conceivable direction. This wasn't a battle. It was a methodical execution. And how did they coordinate such complex maneuvers over a vast battlefield with an unbelievable system of command and control? Their armies were organized on a decimal system. Units of 10 Arban, 100 Zun, 1,000 Mingun, and 10,000 Tumen. Orders were relayed using a sophisticated system of signal flags, horns, and high-speed messengers. One European chronicler examining a captured arrow from a battlefield noted a chilling detail. Carved into the shaft was a strange symbol, a swirling spiral with 3 jagged lines. He dismissed it as a pagan charm. But the surviving soldiers whispered a name for it, a name they heard screamed by the invaders, the Kharash Rune, the symbol of unstoppable doom. Part 3, the heavy tank versus the supersonic fighter. The core of the mismatch can be seen in two opposing images, a European knight on his massive warhorse and a Mongol warrior on his small, rugged pony. The knight was a medieval tank. He and his horse were encased in dozens of kilograms of steel plate and mail. This offered incredible protection in a head-on charge, but it was also a crippling burden. The great war horses, the destriers, were powerful, but had poor stamina. They could only manage short explosive charges before becoming exhausted. The knight himself would quickly overheat and tire under the immense weight of his own protection. The Mongol warrior, in contrast, was the embodiment of speed and endurance. The Mongol horse was small, shaggy, and ugly, but it possessed legendary stamina. It could travel for days on minimal fodder. And each Mongol warrior brought not one but 3 or 4 of these mounts with him. When one horse tired, he simply leapt onto a fresh one. This allowed their armies to move at a pace the Europeans couldn't even fathom. The warrior himself wore light leather or lamellar armor, which allowed him total freedom of movement. He could twist in the saddle, firing his bow in any direction, including backwards at a full gallop. Imagine the encounter. The knight, heavy and slow, trying to close the distance to use his lance or his sword. But he can never get close. The Mongol horse archer simply stays out of reach, circling him like a wolf pack harassing a bear. He constantly fires arrows, peppering the knight, aiming for the gaps in the armor, aiming for the horse. Once the knight's horse went down, the knight was stranded. His armor, once his salvation, now became his prison. He couldn't get up quickly. He couldn't run. He could only stand there helpless, waiting for the final lance thrust to end him. It was a fight between iron and the wind always won. Part 4 divided Europe versus a singular will. The final and perhaps most important reason for the disaster wasn't found on the battlefield. It was found in the halls of power. 13th century Europe was a fractured mess of rivalries. Kings were jealous of each other. Dukes and counts constantly fought over scraps of land. The Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor were locked in their own bitter power struggle. When news of the Mongol threat arrived, Europe's response was chaos and suspicion. The King of Hungary pleaded for aid, but other kingdoms hesitated. They feared it was a trick. They were too preoccupied with their own petty wars. There was no unified command, no grand strategy. Each kingdom, each duchy faced the storm alone. The Mongol Empire, by contrast, was a monolith of unified purpose. Under the great Khan, Ogedei, son of Genghis Khan, the entire empire functioned as a single organism. Orders from the capital of Karakorum were carried thousands of miles by the Yam messenger system in a matter of weeks, ensuring that armies from Persia to Siberia acted on the same plan. The invasion of Europe was not a single raid. It was a massive, brilliantly coordinated pincer movement. One army under Baidar and Kadan smashed into Poland to create a diversion, while the main force under the legendary generals Batu and Subutai annihilated Hungary. Europe wasn't fighting an army. It was fighting an empire. An empire with a single goal, a single command, and a single unbending will. While the knights of Poland and Germany were being butchered at Legnica, the army of Hungary was erased just 2 days later at the Battle of Mohi. Europe was shattering against an organized, focused, and irresistible force. Winter 1241. Europe was on its knees. The door to the rest of the continent was wide open. From Poland and Hungary, the Mongol armies had a clear path to Austria, Italy, Germany, and France. There was no significant army left to stop them. Panic swept the continent. Pope Gregory IX called for a new crusade, but it was a desperate, hollow cry. The best knights were already dead. People believed this was Armageddon, the armies of Satan prophesied in the Bible. Europe was defeated. The Mongol storm was about to consume everything. And then, the unthinkable happened. They stopped. At the very peak of their success, the Mongol generals received a message from Karakorum thousands of miles away. The great Khan, Ogedei, was dead. By Mongol law, all princes of Genghis Khan's line had to return to the capital to elect a new leader. The conquest of Europe had to be put on hold. Batu Khan Subutai, all the great generals reluctantly but obediently turned back. The massive war machine retreated east, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Europe was saved, not by its swords or the courage of its knights, not by the prayers of its popes. Europe was saved by the death of one man on the other side of the world, by a fluke of history, by pure dumb luck, and that is the most brutal truth of all. The Mongol storm exposed a savage truth. The entire European way of war, with its chivalry, its courage, and its shining armor, was hopelessly obsolete against an enemy that thought differently. The knights lost not for a lack of bravery, but for a surplus of illusion. They lost because of rigid tactics and inferior technology. They lost because of their arrogance, their slowness, and above all, their disunity. History is not a romance about shining heroes. It is a brutal lesson in adaptation. The Mongols adapted to conquer the world, while Europe's knights remained trapped in a glorious but fatal past. The storm receded by chance, but it left a terrifying question hanging over history forever. If the great Khan had not died that year, what would the map of our world look like today? Countless harsh realities like this one have been buried behind the myths we're told. If you want to join us as we continue to dig them up and expose them to the light, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Our journey into the real story has only just begun.